Good morning, everybody. Thank you for taking the time out to listen to all of the speakers. Okay, so FLAME means the Final Luminosity Age Mass Estimator. And just for information, I found out very recently. So this was originally developed with Evelyne Le Breton and Frédéric Tavenin. It used to be called LAME, Luminosity Age Mass Estimator, but in English that doesn't work very well. So it's Final Luminosity Age Mass Estimator. So I'm Morla Creevey, and I'm from the Observatoire de la Côte d'Azur. Okay, so I will give you a brief overview of the observables. If you participated already in the previous sessions, I won't be repeating what they said, but I have one slide on each of the BPRP and the RVS so that you can understand what I do. Then I will, then I'll talk about FLAME, the products, the methodology that we use, and the input data. Then I will show you some of the scientific validation and, of course, tell you about the caveats. And finally, I will give you some example queries and examples of how to use the data. So what Gaia observes, in fact, there are many different observables. So a star will start here and it will cross the focal plane like this. Here, this is just a sky mapper, so it tries to estimate what star it's looking at, and based on its magnitude, it will give it some instructions of what to do. So a very bright star, for example, as it crosses here, if it's very bright, it might only integrate until a certain position, right? If it's a faint star, it will continue integrating while the star is crossing. And this is one of the reasons why you sometimes see these there's sometimes jumps in uncertainties on photometric magnitudes. These CCDs are used to do the photometry and the astrometry. So the G band photometry, and of course, using their positions, they do the astrometry. Then the star will pass the blue prism and the red prism, so it will disperse the light. And then finally, it will pass the RVS, the radial velocity spectrometer, and disperse the light even more. Now, there are less CCDs here. There's a lot more down here. So you can see that if a star is here, it's not going to pass it. Okay, so there are actually less transits. When I say transit, I mean observations, passing of the star for the RVS spectra. Plus, of course, they are much fainter, or they need higher signal to noise ratio. Okay, so the two important things that you need to note is that, the BPRP prism spectra, which was presented very nicely by René André, so I'm not going to go into any more detail except for the very basics. I encourage you to watch his webinar for details of this. So basically there are the blue prism, which spans 330 to 680 nanometers, and the red prism between 640 and 1050 nanometers. And here I'm showing an example of the blue and the red prism. Okay, this was in this paper, but the figure was actually produced by René. And you can see how, there's some normalization done here so that we can put everything on the same scale, but you can see that the blue stars, of course, emit a lot more in the blue and less in the red, while the red stars have very little flux in the blue and a lot more flux in the red, okay? And this is just an example. If you do an external calibration, these are the internal spectra that are used in DPAC and in CU8, and this is an example of the external calibration. So there's a couple of stars here along the HR diagram, and you can see how the shapes change a lot. Okay, so there's a lot of information about the type of star we're looking at. The other data product that is important for you to interpret the FLAME results are the RVS high resolution spectra. Why this is important is because FLAME uses the results from GSP spec. And here I'm just showing examples of some spectra. So between 845 and 817 nanometers for different temperatures. So this is a 5,218, 6,500, 34,000, 11,000. Okay, so the spectra are all the black the actual black marks here, and then the orange are some models. Okay, and here's an example of a spectral library. So you can clearly see that the spectra have a lot of information in them to be able to derive temperatures and metallicities and surface gravities. Okay. Um, okay, so there are some of the most important observations that you need to know about in order to understand the flame products. Okay. Okay, so let me just present the team. So the main developers are me. So been doing this since 2014, and Christoph Vodanovic is also a big part of the team, and he's the expert Java programmer. And there's support development and scientific validation from Frédéric Tavenin, Evelyne Le Breton, and Bernard Pichon. And I cannot forget the rest of Coordination Unit 8 and 9, who are all involved in the part of the validation of products and putting everything into the archive and the documentation and finding problems that we didn't find also, so that we can inform you of these. Okay, so the relevant documents, I think I have put the links on all of the slides, but if I don't, I will do it. But just so you know, anything I'm showing here is published. So from the ANA papers, okay, there are two main APSIS papers. So the first one is the overview of the CU8 products. So this is this paper here. For flame, there's specific sections. Number 3, the parameter estimation methods, and then section 4 is dedicated to results on evolutionary parameters. The second paper is APSIS paper number 2, which is the validation of the stellar content. So this is led by Maureen Fresneau. And the most relevant section is 3.3. This is the astrophysical parameter performance. And then finally, depending on the time we have on the left, at the end, especially talking about how to use the products, I refer to this paper, which is a performance verification paper that's called a golden sample of astrophysical parameters. And it's a Gaia collaboration, Creevey et al. Paper. But the information is not just here. On the Cosmos webpage, and there is the online documentation. So the astrophysical parameters are in chapter 11. And 11.3.6 is the flame module. Excuse me, that's the wrong word. It should be just the flame module. And then also there's a public technical note that was published after the release. And if you go to resources, Gaia public documents, there's this technical note here, and here we analyze, this is masses and ages from flame in DR3. This is the name of this technical note. And it provides some extra information, for example, some calibration of the masses. And you'll see why. I'll explain this later. Okay, so what does flame produce? Okay, so flame produces basically these main parameters here. So what I consider observational parameters, that means very little model dependence, luminosity, radius, and the gravitational redshift. The model parameters are the mass, the age, and the evolution stage. And then there are some auxiliary parameters, the bolometric correction. This is given so that you can convert back to your absolute magnitude. And there are some flags. So I will explain each of these in my slides. Now in Gaia DR3, there are two sets of results from flame. So one of them is based on the atmospheric parameters from GSP FOT. And these are found in the table Gaia DR3.astrophysical parameters. And there are approximately 330 million results there for luminosities and radii. There are less for masses and ages. And you can see if you look into the archive, there's in the astrophysical parameters tables, there's several tables here, but these are the main tables. This is where you're going to find the flame products. Then there's a second set of results that are based on the temperature, surface gravity, and metallicity using the GSP spec parameters. And these are found in the astrophysical parameters supplementary table. And this is approximately 5 million sources. Now, of course, some of just because they're in the supplementary table does not mean that they're worse or better, okay? They're based, so for some of the brighter stars, our temperatures are much better from GSP spec compared to GSP FOT in some regimes. So it's much more interesting to use the masses and ages here. And this is where it's up to the user to decide which is the better one to use. In the ideal case, they are both identical results, but we know this is not the case. Do note that both of the results use the extinction from GSP foot. Okay, so this is the AG GSP foot value. Okay, because there is no determination of extinction from GSP spec. Also, just to show you the distribution of the sources. So on the left, I'm just showing G magnitude and color. So just to observe color. And the gray is just showing all of the sources in DR3. And what the color is showing here is where Flame has some results. And the color code is the number of sources. And you can see there's very clear cut at this value here. This is 18.25. This was done because we have a lot of, in CU8, there are a lot of products to process. This takes time, and during the operations for Gaia DR3, we imposed limits on specific products. For Flame, for deriving masses and ages, it didn't seem like it made very much sense to go beyond 18.25 due to the limitations in the input data. This could go further in DR4. This we have to see depending on the performance. So this is why you will see a clear cut. And basically, yeah, this corresponds to, yes, approximately 450 million sources in total. Of course, there were only 330 million of results. This is just a similar diagram, but just showing it as a function of like correcting for parallax, just to put it onto, say, a Hathor diagram view. And you can see that it covers most of the parameter space, not very, very hot stars. Okay. There are a couple of hot stars, but it's limited basically at the maximum 20,000 Kelvin. But most of the stars are, of course, FGK, AFGK stars. Okay, so this is how the observational parameters are determined. And it's very basic. And so compared to the other modules that you've seen, Flame actually does not use the spectra, right? We use the derived products. So in some sense, I am like you. I am a user of the results from GSP foot and GSP spec. Okay. But this is very interesting because it also provides an alternative way of deriving parameters, and then it's very useful for also the validation of our parameters. Okay, so whatever is in this light purple, I hope this is okay. I don't know if there's any colorblind people here, but this is the light purple. These are the products that are produced by Flame. Okay, so loom_flame you'll find in the astrophysical parameters table. Loom_flame_spec are the results using the temperatures from the atmospheric parameters from GSP spec, and they will be found in the supplement table. Okay, so how this works. Okay, well the first, and the blue are the parameters that come from GSP foot or GSP spec. These black ones here are ones that you all have access to as well, the photometric G mean mag and the parallax. Okay, so first thing we need are atmospheric parameters, the temperature, log G, and metallicity. And with these, we derive a bolometric correction. Okay, this is based on a grid of models. Now the grid of models does include alpha over iron. Okay, but for us, our assumption is alpha over iron equals 0, because in GSP foot, they do not estimate alpha over iron equals 0, and we need to apply the exact same methods to both sets of data. Okay, so this is a bolometric correction. Then using the G mean magnitude, and then the parallax or the distance from GSP foot, I'll explain that later, which one we used. And along with the extinction from GSP foot, well, then we can calculate the luminosity using standard equations. Then with the luminosity, we again use the temperature, and this allows us to derive the radius. And then using the surface gravity from GSP foot and GSP spec, we derive the gravitational redshifts. Okay, so it's very very clear. There's nothing hidden. This is why I consider it observational. We are not very dependent on models. Of course, the bolometric correction depends on models, and of course, these parameters that we need also have model dependence. But from a Flame point of view, everything is very transparent with little model dependence. I just want to comment that the bolometric corrections that were used, this has been published as a small Python code, and you can find it. This is clickable on the Cosmos webpage under software tools. It's like DR3 software tools. So if you want to use these using the tables that we used, you can do this. And of course, you can also include for alpha over iron, which we set to 0, but in the tool it's available. Okay, then there are the model parameters. So how's this done? Okay, well, we take the luminosity that was derived, and then we use the effective temperature and the metallicity, and then we use the Basti evolution model. So these are the Hidalgo et al. 2018. And we produced mass, the age, and the evolution stage. So I'll discuss those in a second. We note that in Gaia DR3, as you've heard if you participated at the webinar from René, there were issues with the metallicities. So we impose a solar metallicity prior. Okay, and this is the prior that we impose. And this obviously means that our results will be valid for solar metallicities, but if they're not, if it's a very non-solar metallicity, you need to be very careful using our results. In particular, the ages, they probably won't make sense. For the masses, we have published a calibration where you can correct the masses using with your own metallicity assumption. Okay. So the model parameters, as I said, the solar metallicity prior was assumed due to the known issues with the low metallicities in GSB foot at the time. We used the Basti evolution tracks. These are the Hidalgo et al. 2018. Our assumption is that the star is somewhere between the 0 age main sequence to the tip of the red giant branch. So if the star that you're looking at, is a pre-main sequence and it has a result, it's going to be forced to be somewhere on the 0 age main sequence to the tip of the red giant branch. So the results will be, of course, biased or incorrect. It's the same if you know your star is much evolved along the tip of the red giant branch. Well, it's going to be forced to be on the tip of the red giant branch, or forced to be on the red giant branch. In particular, for example, the red clump stars, okay, they're very similar properties. But it will be assumed that it's red giant. And the reason for this assumption is we are using luminosity, temperature, and a metallicity. Okay, so there's not a lot more you can do. If you want to look at pre-main sequence and post red giant branch, you need other information to help you decorrelate the properties. So the masses are between 0.5 and 10 solar masses. For Gaia DR4, we will go down to 0.1. This is the plan. The ages are between 0.1 to 14 billion years. Okay, so this is the prior that we imposed. And for the evolution stage, this is exactly the definition that is taken from the Basti evolution tracks. If it's between 100 and 420, it's a main sequence. If it's between 420 and 490, it's a subgiant. If it's between 490 and 1200, it's a red giant branch. Now I think there are a couple of cases where we have a prior, but we may still have some values that are 1600. Well, you just should ignore those values. And the evolution stage is just published as a float value, not within a confidence interval. The masses and the ages are published with a value plus a lower and upper interval. So only those solutions that converged concerning the model parameters, these are the only ones that are published. And this is why you will see, for example, I can't remember the numbers, but you'll see less masses and ages in Gaia DR3 compared to the number of luminosity and radii. Okay. Okay, so just a note about how we use GSP foot and GSP spec. So GSP foot use a Markov chain, Monte Carlo, okay? And what Flame does, it actually processes that chain. So it takes each combination of temperature, extinction, etc., and it processes it. It derives the Flame luminosity, mass, its age, etc. Okay. For GSP spec, we use a bootstrap type of a method. So basically, the parameters, the input parameters are perturbed by the errors. So not just the GSP spec, but also the parallaxes and the magnitude. And this we do it 300 times, which was a nice compromise between processing time and getting statistically correct results. And then what is published is the actual value of the parameter, which is given by the weighted median of the distribution. And then the upper and the lower correspond to the 16 and 84 percentiles of the weighted distribution. Our weights come from our priors. So this means the metallicity prior, an age prior, but also an evolution stage prior where there's more weight on the main sequence. As you know, the temperature luminosity changes a lot more slowly on the main sequence. So we need to compensate for this in order to properly estimate the parameters. Okay, note about the flags. So flags for flame, there are only 2 or 1 characters. These are strings. This was a full decision at CU8 that we'll do a string. So the value of A, it gives you information about the quality of the mass and the age. The flag B, which is only relevant to the results based on GSP foot input, it gives you the source of the distance information, okay, for the calculation of the luminosity. So concerning the mass and age, so A equals 0, it means there's nothing to report. A equals 1 means that this star is a giant, and the mass and the age should be considered with an uncertainty on the order of 20 to 30%, because we know uncertainties are underestimated in some regimes. And A equals 2 means that there's no mass and age, so the model didn't converge. Concerning B, so this is only relevant for the GSP foot-based results. So B equals 0 is the parallax was used. B equals 1, we use distance GSP foot. And B equal 2, the parallax is used due to convergence issues with distance GSP foot. All of this is documented on the online documentation. But just to give you a general overview, parallax is generally used when the error is less than 20%. Okay, beyond that, we use the distance GSP foot unless we found convergence issues. Okay, so let me go to the scientific validation and caveats. Okay, so most of this is from the online documentation or some of the APSIS papers. So what I'm showing are HOR diagrams. Okay, so on the left, so you can see I'm using the luminosity from flame directly from the catalog, and this is the temperature from GSP foot. This is just a random selection of about 2 or 3 million sources. It's not the full catalog, okay? So things that you can notice, for example, there are some, well, okay, these issues here, this is model issue convergence issues that René André already informed you about. This is the temperature boundaries at 8,000. Okay, but these long things can also be partially due to extinction correlations. Okay, and then you can see that this is kind of got 2 types of main sequences, and this is due to the overlap between the Phoenix and the Marx models. Okay, so, but as you can see, in general, we get a good HR diagram, and this is without filtering. There's these stars here. Not sure if these are real or not yet. I can't remember if we followed up on these. Okay, and this is the same HR diagram when we select on flags flame equals 0, 0, 1, 0, or 2, 0. Okay, so this is basically, i.e., we're using the parallax instead of the distance. So the parallax uncertainty is generally less than 20%. Okay, and you can see that it cleans up the diagram, the HR diagram, a lot. Okay, 20% parallax is error. Parallax is still a huge error on distance. Okay, this is another example of the HR diagram. Sorry, I did apply the same flags as the previous. Sorry, oh no, sorry, excuse me. It's in the online doc. This one is in Creevey et al. 2022. This is a HR diagram using temperature from GSP spec and the luminosity flame GSP spec. The color code here is age. Okay, so just, okay, these black dots in the back, these are just other results that are there. You can see I said this gray as well. These are other results. So we do not have ages for these gray things here that you can see in the background. Okay, we only have ages for everything that is color coded. And you can see what that we have. Well, the ages, it's color coded here. It makes astrophysical sense. Of course, you'll have to see if this makes sense for you, for your source. Um, below 4,500, we need to be just a little bit careful. Already the ages are probably not very reliable because we're looking at M stars and they change so little during their evolution that the ages are probably not very reliable down there. Okay, but the masses should be reliable. The masses are. Another example, so this is the radius. So when I'm showing our comparisons with astroseismic determinations of radii, on the left I'm showing with main sequence stars, and this is from the Serenelli et al. 2017 catalog, and this is the comparison with the Pinsno et al., which is the Apocask sample. Okay, so for giants, okay, so you can see, for example, we have a systematic offset compared to the Serenelli ones of about 3%. Okay, there is also a scatter, but this is fine. We expect to have a scatter. I'm just color coding it by temperature just to see. You can see that so the hot beyond around 6,000, okay, we have the systematic offset. When we get cooler, okay, we seem to be doing a little bit better. Of course, we're not saying we're right or they're right. Just to be aware that there are systematic biases compared to external catalogs, and this is just one example of an external catalog that we used. On the right, then we're showing the example of the comparison with the giants from the Apocask, and you can see we have actually, it's a less than 1% bias with the scatter on the order of about 10%, which is expected. Okay, um, so don't be surprised to find some biases or not. This is normal. The mass and age, which are harder to derive. When I'm showing on this one, I'm showing a comparison of the flame mass with an analysis from Casagrande et al. 2011. So I wanted to avoid just using astroseismic masses because we're more or less in the same regime. We're using luminosities, temperatures, and metallicities. We're not using extra information. And you can see that we have agreement for the full range of masses apart from some outliers. This is color coded according to metallicity, so we're mostly solar metallicity regime, of course. There's a small bias on the order of about 1 or 2%, 1%, 2%, compared to the Casagrande, with, of course, a scatter, which is typical of uncertainties in this range. Then when you compare with the age, okay, I'll compare these to the astroseismic ones. So the blue are the ones from the Serenelli et al. Catalog, and then these green ones are from one that I produced myself, but this is using individual frequency analysis. And you can see that, well, we have an overall agreement in ages. Of course, there is a large scatter, but we can expect this for ages. These are for main sequence stars only. Okay, for giants, the ages are extremely difficult to derive. And if you compare one catalog with another, you're going to get very different answers, including with the DR3. Okay, so now just comparing results within CU8. So if you did participate in Renee's talk, GSP FUT also produces results that can be compared with FLAME. So they produce an MG GSP FUT, so the absolute magnitude from GSP FUT, whereas we produce a luminosity, again, using slightly different assumptions. Even though our temperatures are the same, we still have different methods, okay? So we compare the absolute magnitudes with that from FLAME, and you can calculate the one from FLAME because we have the luminosity. The luminosity is published and the bolometric correction, okay? And you can see that we have an overall agreement here with the absolute magnitude. Of course, there's some scatter down here, and most of these are due to poor parallaxes or bad distance determinations. Okay, so we're pretty confident that our results can be used for the best for good parallaxes and good distances, good photometric magnitude. Another thing we did was we compared the masses from flame with masses that could be derived using GSP foot, surface gravity, and GSP foot radius, because there's a radius from GSP foot that's been published. And we did this. This is one of the referee questions which was asked, and I think was a very smart one to do. So what I'm showing is the distribution of the differences between mass flame versus mass from GSP foot divided by the uncertainty, the joint uncertainty. So we would expect everything to be 68% to between -1 and 1, etc. So when we look at the solar metallicity, which is 46% of the sample, this is the gray dot, and you can see that we get practically identical results within our uncertainties. When we go to lower metallicities, so between -1 and -0.5, this is 28% of the sample. We get slightly biased results, okay, but we're still, we're 1 sigma off. -2, -1, this is 23%. Again, okay, we're much more biased there. There's 2 sigma off, okay, so this is showing that the masses from flame, you need to be careful for these lower metallicities. And then when we go to the lowest metallicities, which is only 2% of the sample, we have the largest offsets. Okay, so beware of these offsets if you're using the data directly from DR3. I have it later, but I will show you how to correct these masses for metallicity. And finally, another test that we did, which we think is extremely important to do, we use an external code and the exact same input data and assumptions. Okay, because one thing is to compare results with some external catalog, but we may not have the same temperatures, we may not have the same metallicities, we may not have the same luminosities. So what we did is we compared the flame results with the results using the SPINS code. So this is the Le Breton-Maurice 2020 paper and code. This is publicly available, but we use the same input data, so the same, from temperature and luminosity and metallicities and the solar metallicity assumption. Okay, and so what I'm showing here is a comparison between the masses from flame with the mass. This is from SPINS code, and it's color coded as a function of log G. And you can see that we get results that are almost identical. In particular, all the main sequence stars. When we get to giant stars, we have more dispersion here, okay? So this is published on the online documentation, but there is the public technical note that I mentioned earlier. This goes into a lot more detail about these comparisons. And also there I also show a comparison between the age of flame and the age of spins as a function of sigma. Okay, this is in the second APSIS paper. And when we show for all stars, which is given by the blue here in the background, okay, if we select just the main sequence stars, you can see that we get we've almost agreement in age. And if we try to do some kind of a fit just to give an estimate of the offset, we get an offset of -0.4 sigma. Compared to what we do using spins. Of course, we have different methods that are working, so this contributes to the different results. The point is that when we use the same data, input data, and the same assumptions, we get similar results. Okay, caveats. Okay, so things that you should be just aware of. There's a 0 point concerning the luminosity. Okay, so we use bolometric corrections, which means that we have to fix a bolometric correction scale. And this has been mg, this is what we fix it as, mg equals 4.66. It's given in section 4.3 of the APSIS 1 paper, and here I just have a screenshot. Okay, so the adaptive value for the bolometric correction of the sun is plus 0.08 magnitude, where of course our bolometric magnitude is 4.74, which is the standard IIU value. So this yields an absolute magnitude of the sun. Okay, so we estimated this by using different methods. So, which is also contributing to how we estimate our uncertainty. So we estimate an external accuracy on the 0 point on the order of 1.5% because we compared it with known solar analogs. So our absolute magnitude in G of known solar magnitudes is, okay, it's quite a large scatter there. When we use stellar models, we get this value. And then if we use color transformations using the early data release paper on photometry, Rio et al., we get a V minus G of this, okay, where V is this, and this automatically then gives us what a VMG should be. So we analyzed several methods to do this, and in the end we fixed the scale at 4.66. Okay, so we think it could be off by plus or minus 0.015. So if you want to re-estimate it, well, you can take this into account. And you can do this analytically with from the luminosity directly. Caveats. Again, as I mentioned several times, we used a solar metallicity prior, and this is for both the GSP foot-based and the GSP spec-based results. We had to do for both because it's the same method, and so hopefully in DO4 this is something that we can resolve. It was something we couldn't resolve in time for our operations. So if you go to the Gaia Cosmos page, the resources, there's Gaia public documents. There's a document, it's not the last, it's the second last one today on that list. It's Gaia C18 OCA OLC, OLC for my initials, OCA because it's the Observatoire, the Côte d'Azur, and it's this document here. And there we talk about basically masses and ages in Gaia DR3. We would have liked to have published a paper, but we just did not have we just didn't have the time to publish another paper before Gaia DR3, so we decided to publish it as a technical note. Okay, so some things that are in this technical note, so I encourage you to go have a look at this. Some examples of tests that we did. So, for example, we took simulated data using metallicity equals minus 0.7. Okay, these are again the Basti tracks. And then we try to retrieve the masses assuming a solar metallicity. Okay, so basically our assumptions. We want to quantify the impact of the solar metallicity assumption on our results. And this is what I'm showing here. So I'm color coding by evolution index. So I remind you that here, yellow, orange is main sequence, orangey, reddy, purple is about subgiant, and then all these darker things are giants. Okay, so here is the one-to-one line. This is what we would expect. So when we do it with the solar metallicity tracks, of course, we get one-to-one. And you can see there's plenty of these figures in this document. This is just one example, but you can see that there is this offset, but it's a very quantifiable offset for the main sequence stars. For this because I assumed the wrong metallicity. Okay, for the giants, it's a lot more complicated. So what we did is we actually propose calibrations to the mass. So how to correct the Gaia DR3 masses if you have a new metallicity. So we have some polynomial corrections, and you just need to know your external metallicity along with the Gaia DR3 mass that's published. And we do this for the main sequence stars and the subgiants. Okay, so this is an example of the results. I apologize for the terrible resolution here. So here I'm showing basically the residual. So the mass from flame minus the minus the fit. Okay, so this is the residuals. Instead of showing this versus this, I'm showing the input and then the residuals. Okay, so in the ideal case, we get 0 residuals because we've estimated correctly. These are the residuals, which basically correspond to this. Okay, these are the residuals, which are color coded by mass. Okay, you need to know the mass. You need to know the Gaia DR3 mass. And when we apply the fit to the values, we end up with a mean offset around 1 with the scatter, of course. Okay, so the fit to these residuals, which will allow you to correct the masses for different metallicities, can be done, and these coefficients are published in this Gaia technical note. This is for main sequence and this is for subgiants. So we separate them, main sequence and subgiants, because they're different offsets. We don't attempt to do it for giants because it's just very difficult to do, and we leave that to the user to decide if they need to use our values or not. Okay, other caveats. So the uncertainties in the model parameters are underestimated. We have seen this comparing with some external data. Some of it comes from propagation of upstream errors. So for example, Renee mentioned some temperatures are very underestimated, and this automatically will propagate through to underestimated luminosities, underestimated uncertainties on the luminosities, which then of course means that we have underestimated uncertainties in the model parameters, but it's also due to the fact that we have this solar metallicity prior, so that when we are, trying to invert the models, we'll end up kind of cutting out some of the possibilities so that our models, our uncertainties in the end up underestimated. Concerning the giants, the masses and the ages of giants, okay, what we propose to do, and this is particular after validation, after we produce the data, so this came from the validation from the archive team afterwards, we realized you should use between 1 and 2 solar mass only, okay, and only when the age is larger than 1 gig a year, okay. This is for giants, okay, so anything with a lower mass or a much higher mass, we encourage you just to be very wary that the result is, you need to take it with a pinch of salt, or larger uncertainties. Okay, so I have 10 minutes later, 10 minutes left. So just to finish with some example queries and using the data. Okay, so I'll start off with a couple of queries which shows you how to find the data. Okay, so there's this figure that I showed earlier on. So I'll show you how to reproduce this figure, or at least most of it. Okay, so I remind you that the tables are the astrophysical parameters and the astrophysical parameters sub. So the query is the HydroDiagram diagram using the flame results based on the GSP spec parameters color-coded by age. This means that we need to have the luminosity from flame, we need to have the temperature, we need to have the age. Okay, so what we could do is we can select these. I probably don't need source ID right now, but as a user, I tend to select the source ID because it makes sense just to keep it. So I'm going to record just these parameters. Okay, so we're going to select these from Gaia DR3 Astrophysical Parameters sub as, well, I call it APS, so I don't have to repeat this here. Okay. And then we're going to inner join it with astrophysical parameters on the source ID. Okay, so this allows me to select Loom Flame spec. Oh, sorry, this is a mistake. This should say age flame spec. I'll correct this. Age flame spec. And then you will be able to produce this figure. Okay. So a second example is if you want to recalculate the radius and the luminosity, the GSP foot-based ones, and compare them with flame. So these are just some random examples. So I'm going to select source ID, the parallax, photometric G mean magnitude, the AG from GSP foot, the bolometric correction from flame, the luminosity from flame, the temperature from GSP foot, and the radius from flame. And so I'm going to select this from the Gaia DR3 Astrophysical Parameter. Sorry, I made a mistake again. Astrophysical Parameters, no sub, as AP. And then I'm going to inner join it on Gaia DR3. Okay, and I just call this as GS for short. And I inner join it on the source ID. So I have to match them on something, right? And then I'll be able to retrieve all of these and I can do whatever calculations that I want to do. Okay, so that's how to find the data. Examples on some queries that I will correct. How to use the data. Okay, so as you're aware, astrophysical parameters, you can derive them in many different ways. So it really depends on what you want to do with it. So if you look at it on a star-by-star basis, for example, what you can do with the photometry and the colors and the parallaxes, So I would encourage people to also check the uncertainties on the parallax and the photometry. Okay, so if they have large parallaxes, parallax uncertainties or large photometric uncertainties, just be wary that our results, may have biases due to distances, parallaxes. So, but if we're quite, so if these are quite reasonable uncertainties, well, then I wouldn't even question the parameters. You can use them directly. Okay. Do note that the luminosities uh, do depend on the extinction. Okay, so if you do find a source and the extinction is completely wrong, well, then you need to be worried that that value could be incorrect. Okay. If you want to use them on a statistical sense, do note the selection function. So I showed you that we stopped at 18.25. You have information on the sources that produce masses compared to the sources that don't produce masses. You can use the flags for that. You need to consider the solar metallicity assumption, notably for the model parameters. Okay, it's not so important for so we also use it for the bolometric correction. We use the metallicities there, but this has the metallicity has a smaller effect on the bolometric corrections compared to, for example, the temperature and the surface gravity, which are good. The masses can be corrected if you know your star is not solar metallicity. You can correct them. So see the public technical note with the coefficients published. And then as the final, another way is I always see the Gaia DR3 catalog as a legacy catalog for finding interesting targets for follow-up. Okay, I think this is going to be the long-term interest for at least for the flame products, because as you know, you can use a lot of external data and you can get much higher precision, accurate masses and ages when you use infrared data, for example, or you use astroseismic data. Okay, so this is certainly where I think it should be used. I need to finish soon, but just as an example of things that we can do and what we did. So I'm just going to show you a few plots from the golden sample of astrophysical parameters. So this was the third paper that I mentioned. It's a Gaia collaboration, Creevey et al. Paper. So there's one section on it that is dedicated to FGKM stars and uses the flame products. So here's an example. So this is what we derived as our golden sample. So where we put criteria on temperatures, luminosities, metallicities, but also radii, masses. So there's criteria on also the flame parameters, not just the flame parameters. And this is approximately 4 million stars. And this is the same diagram, but here we've color coded by age. So we think this is a really nice sample where you can use for, well, whatever you want to do. Well, also useful also for people to compare with their own analyses. So this table is published as gold sample FGKM stars. There's been a little bit more filtering on this. For example, the ages here have been cleaned up and the mass have been cleaned up because we could do this for this paper, but we couldn't do it for the archive. So for the giants, for example, we've cleaned up a lot of these. Just a comparison. So this is just how the radius flame from the golden sample with the Plato input catalog compare. So you can see that we have almost agreement with a scatter. So we're getting results that are on the same scales. Another example is using solar analogs. So there's a query here. You can have a look at this yourself. In the end, this was based on GSP spec temperatures and radii from flame. We have 5,863 solar analogs, and we've derived the colors of the sun using the solar analogs. And here is an example of the mean solar, the RVS spectrum of the solar analogs, okay, where this gray is the scatter from 916 published RVS spectra. Okay, so these are really good to start off with, but we believe you could continue with these and try to, clean up if there's anything to clean up with the solar analogs. And then finally, concerning planets, so we use the FGKM golden sample and we use them to derive planetary characteristics. So here I'm showing the radius versus the semi-major axis. Okay, as a function of temperature, and the color code is the period of the planet. And then, so we can do this so we basically combined our values with the external data from exoplanet.org. Okay. And this is another one showing the planet and the radius and the mass. Okay, so this table here, okay, it's in the paper. There's only 3 lines in the paper, but it will be published. It's published as on a CDS, but it's actually only going to be published now because if you're as you're aware of it, all of the Gaia papers are only being formally published by ANA right now, not a few months ago. So this full table will appear on CDS, giving the planetary properties along with the host properties that we have. And thank you for your attention, and I'll stop. Thank you.
Thank you, Orla. Very, very informative. I think very clear, but I am aware of the content. And I think from the comment it seemed very appreciated. So we have a question in the chat. I don't know if you want to read it, but essentially the person asks if you tried with other data sets of isochrones, such as star-level, parsec, and if it gives you an uncertainty, what is the impact on these different stellar models?
No, it's a very, very important question. So we have tested with the SESAM. We have models from SESAM that we used, but we actually stopped using them after DR2 while we were developing, even though there was no results published in DR2, but we just decided that we would go with the Basti evolutionary models. And this was done because we could do the evolutionary stage. We didn't have time to do the same thing because every time you run, you need this. It's complicated. You have to put everything in the right format and the right auxiliary data format, and so we never actually did this test. Would be a good test to do at some stage. But I think what you can do is if you use the SPINS code, I believe the SPINS code you can use different models, and we get almost identical results to the SPINS code as I showed. So maybe you can do it like this.
Yeah. I think that just as a reference from people not in DPAC, in DPAC, we have a lot of constraint on what we can and we cannot do, time constraint essentially. So even if you wanted to do a lot of tests, there is practically no time to do that. So some of them, we unfortunately can mention that it could be useful to do, but we cannot do it in the processing time. We have time maybe after a data release to explore something, but again, all has to run at DPCC, a data center in France. So everything is sort of booked and scheduled. It does not happen, it does not seem so from the outside, but the Gaia schedule is very tight. And we really do not have slack time to, unfortunately for us to perform many of the tests. There is another quick question.
Just for example, the DR4 data we're going to start processing next year, or producing the data in January next year, right? But you won't see it until 2025 because it takes 9 months to process everything, right? So,
and because of the huge validation that we do afterward with CU9. So, okay, there is another question. The person is unsure if it is a Zoom artifact, but what could be the cause for the sharp line? I think it's that one. Yes.
I think it's this one.
Yes, it's not Zoom. I think. Maybe if I can, it is in GSP thoughts. I think it is some result from GSP thoughts output because we see some artifacts at this magnitude in GSP thought, but it's just a supposition.
Yes, I don't think we followed up on that. Yeah.
But I remember something exactly that same magnitude in GSP thoughts. So you can see from where you have the data is really important to interpret how to interpret that, to tell how to interpret the data. We will follow up on this question on the follow-up of this webinar. Thank you for the question. Okay, thank you. I think you can move to the other chat if someone is interested. We will wait for you there. And have a nice day, everybody. Goodbye.
Thank you, everybody, for your attention. Bye.